I'm trying to make this whole topic a little more light and fun. Um, I'm trying to put the fun back in funeral. It's-
Hi, welcome to Work in Progress, a podcast about the work we do and why we do it. I'm here with Greg Barnsdale today. Greg is a unique death doula. As an undertaker, certified executive advisor, certified financial planner, ghostwriter, and hospice volunteer, he brings a perspective shared by few others. He successfully published a well received book, which is thought provoking and engaging. It's gaining solid attention across several industries. Shortly after publication, Greg was diagnosed with a large brain tumor. Faced with prompt brain surgery or death sentence, he emerged with a very compelling message. He is on a mission to inspire more people to get their affairs in order. He's seen far too many situations where poor planning has left surviving family members in extensive turmoil, while backed into an expensive corner. Memories of deceased loved ones can often become negative if proactive planning during life was ignored. The fact that only about half the adult population of Canada and the US has a valid current will is strong evidence. Greg has leveraged everything he has witnessed and created a compelling message to inspire readers into action. He recruited over 2 dozen engaged readers to provide feedback as he created the book to ensure it was what the average reader would find most helpful. The result is a well respected book that the president of Canadian Snowbird Association highly endorses. Quote, Greg's message is very worthy of your attention. It is well written and contains valuable information which will help you to help those you care about most. Thanks so much for being here, Greg.
oh, you're welcome, Donnalee. My pleasure.
So, what I want to know is what is it exactly that you do?
Well, I have worked in a number of different roles that relate to that bio that you had just read about me. But right now, I'm promoting this book that I've published that you had referenced. Do not ignore your mortality. Practical advice from a funeral and financial insider. I'm promoting this full time. Um, I have worked in the past as a licensed funeral director for over a decade. I've worked as a certified financial planner, helping clients with their retirement planning for over a decade. I've worked for a large bank in the past and a large insurance company. So I've worked in quite a number of different roles relating to end of life types of situations. Uh, so I hope that answers your question. That's what I'm doing now.
hmm hmm Now, how did you how did you come to understand that this was something that you could get paid for? What inspired you to get involved in end of life care?
Well, when I was young, in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up speaking to a career counselor about different options, and based on a questionnaire that I had completed long ago, it indicated that I should consider becoming a funeral director. I also had interest in becoming a helicopter pilot, but I didn't have enough physics, so I deviated towards becoming an undertaker, and I worked at that for quite a number of years and enjoyed it, helping people at the worst time in their life. But I eventually wanted to try something else, and that's when I shifted away from that. I had developed an interest in estate planning, and that's when I joined the financial services industry.
Mhm. Wow, that's kinda cool from, the options of, funeral director and, helicopter pilots.
Yes, yes, it is. I know.
Mm, excellent. So, um, your new book, what inspired you to write that?
Well, I have followed the death awareness movement for years. Ever since I joined the funeral industry back in the 80s. Um, and I had just noticed that there were a number of great books written by lawyers about estate planning issues and a few other people, especially from the financial planning industry, as time evolved. But I didn't see a book that, and I still hadn't seen another book actually that is written quite the same way that mine is. And mine is really just a conversation starter. It's a short read. I'm getting all kinds of people telling me that it's inspiring them to pull out their will and read it and talk to their family members about what they want to have happen when they die. So it's really getting people out of that inertia. But what compelled me to write it was I felt that I had a message that would help people, especially when it comes to all the things that I had seen go awry when no proactive planning was done. And I had seen this in both the funeral industry and the financial planning industry because I was constantly talking to people about pre-planning from a
Hmm.
couple of different important perspectives.
Hmm. Yeah. So within your work, I mean, a lot of people must think that it's a very depressing job. Do you? And I don't get the impression that you find that your work is depressing.
Well, no, I don't think it is. I guess it really depends on your personality, but from my perspective and those that I've talked to in the funeral industry, I have found the vast majority of people enjoy the role because we are all very people and service oriented to try and
Hmm.
help these people at the worst time of their life, and it is a very noble position to be able to help people at that time.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems to me like quite a privilege to be able
It
to be
is.
trusted like that.
It is, yeah. And I've worked for large funeral homes and small funeral homes. I've been an examination proctor for the funeral regulator here in Ontario, helping students get through their practical exams. So I've also worked as a supervisor at one of the largest mortuaries in Canada. So I've seen and done a lot of things within the funeral industry. But as I said, coming back to this message, it just seemed no matter what role I was in, even as a retirement planner, where I had to bring up the issue of premature death with people and the risks pertaining to the retirement planning, just so many people didn't want to talk about these things. And the statistics that you had mentioned in my bio that I found writing this book, that so many people still don't even have a current and valid will, is astonishing.
I find that really surprising as well. Now, what do you think is leading to that? Is that um, folks just not wanting to talk about death because it's not pleasant? Do you think that perhaps it's because maybe they're low income and they don't feel like they have anything to look after? Do you have any perspective on that?
Yes, I think it's a number of things actually, Donnalee. I think it's the fact that it's an uncomfortable topic. People don't want to think about the fact that ultimately they will die, that we're all mortal. And I found even as a financial planner, talking to people about the risk of a disability as well as I help people with disability insurance and critical illness insurance. Uh, we all assume that each day is going to carry on as it has, and these major events won't happen to us. They'll happen to other people, not us. But
Mm.
it we're all at risk of becoming sick or worse. But I do think the other aspect is typically the hassle factor of putting a will together, as well as the perceived cost. And that's something
Mm.
that I certainly address in a straightforward fashion in my book is that people can get a will these days rather easily online for a very low cost. But those that are considering doing that need to be very careful because it's not for everybody. If, as an example, if someone owns property outside of the jurisdiction where they live, they should see a lawyer. If they're paying child support, they should see a lawyer about their will. If they have any type of interest in a business, they should be seeing a lawyer. But if someone's situation is very, very straightforward, setting up a will online, and there's many providers, can work for them.
You mentioned you've seen a lot of different situations where things have gone terribly awry. Now,
Yeah.
I know you can't give any specifics, of course, but if you could mention a few of the different things that could go awry if you didn't have any planning before passing away.
Yes. Well, one of the biggest factors is that if someone dies without a valid will in place, it is much harder on the family members to settle that estate. A valid will, is the only way that any of us can specify who we want to wrap up our life, which is an incredibly important role. But if someone dies without a will, that that is not specified, and therefore the government rules then apply, and the courts basically determine who is going to settle your estate. And it may not be anyone who you want it to be. And that's why we're far better off to have a will to specify who is to do this, but not only that, who is to get what, and what our final wishes are, not necessarily our funeral wishes to go into that will. Those are typically set up separately, but it just creates a lot of messy confusion and hassles, and can even cost the family more money ultimately than by just going through the simple, relatively simple process of setting up a will in the first place.
Hmm. It's interesting. A lot of celebration involved with a birth, and there's there's some celebration with a death as well. But I think there's so much more planning that happens at the creation of life rather than the end. And I'm wondering, in your time as a funeral director, do you have any experiences that you want to share of people celebrating end of life?
I've seen hundreds and hundreds of funerals, Donnalee, and many of them were very emotionally charged, beautiful ceremonies, creating a beautiful send off for the person that has died. But at the opposite end of the scale, I've seen situations where people have struggled with the fact that they didn't expect this to happen. I've seen that so many times, and anybody in the funeral industry would tell you the same thing if they've been in it long enough. But to answer your question, yes, I've seen many beautiful ceremonies. But what comes to mind, I guess, a little more often to me is the fact that there are a lot of people that just aren't expecting a death to take place. Um, that they're not expecting the additional expenses that all of a sudden they have on their plate that have to be dealt with, and all the bureaucratic red tape and hassles and paperwork and all these extra steps now that they have on their plate on top of the grief that they're going through at the same time.
Mhm.
uh, so I don't know if I'm answering your question directly. I'm kind of deviating back to this message that I'm looking to share with as many people as I can across Canada and the States. Um, that it's so important for people to take this seriously and be proactive, because we
Mhm.
don't know when our last day is. None of us does.
Mhm. You've seen thousands of funerals. I'm wondering also, I think about a funeral as, a very somber occasion. And I think about people wearing black. And usually when I think about it, it's raining. I'm wondering if you've seen different cultural representations at different funerals and what maybe some of those unique rites of passage were.
I have, yes. And anybody in the funeral industry, depending on their geographic location, of course, and the clientele, the families that they serve. But I've witnessed funerals from all kinds of different cultures, especially when I've worked in Toronto, which is has such obviously a high population. But yes, I've pretty well seen, I don't know how many, Donnalee, but many of them. I've seen cultures where this is something that actually I mentioned in my book that I don't think a lot of people would actually give some thought to. But one of the things that I've seen quite often in the funeral industry is the aspect of superstition. I've seen situations where females were not allowed to see the body at a certain time because that was felt to be bad luck. I've seen situations where the funeral procession, where were required to drive past the deceased home and stop the funeral hearse in front of the house momentarily, while a friend or neighbor opened up the front door of the house so the spirit could rejoin the body in the funeral hearse for the burial. So there's all kinds of different, I guess, customs and things that you see in this industry, which have to be respected because they are vitally important to many, many people, and I understand and respect that. But yeah, there's all kinds of very interesting things that you see in the funeral industry, and that's one of the aspects that attracted me to it as a young man.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that Toronto would be, it's very diverse, so you would be
Yes,
seeing a lot of that in Toronto, a lot of different rites of passage, which is
yes,
pretty interesting. Now,
yeah.
in your bio, you also made reference, personally to your diagnosis with your brain tumor, and was that what actually propelled you to get into the end of life business?
No, no, it wasn't actually. Um, I started in the funeral business when I was, uh, 19 years of age, so that's a long time ago. Back in the '80s, I first got licensed as a funeral director, and I have spent my whole career, Donnalee, stressing to people that they need to be prepared, whether working as a financial advisor or a funeral director. So it just seems so ironic that after years and years and years of sharing this type of important message with people, and then ultimately trying different things to find my niche where I felt I could make a big difference in people's lives. Finally, figuring out that I should put this together in a good book. Um, 2 months after I published the book, I was diagnosed with this large brain tumor. I had a ringing in my left ear, and that basically started from the time that the pandemic started. I was given one of those deep swabs in my left nostril, and the next day I got a ringing in my left ear, tinnitus, it's called, or something like that, tinnitus. So I went to my doctor and asked if it was related to the recent swab that I had, and he said, "No, I don't think it would be." But I kept having this ringing in my ear, and then I was eventually referred to an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and he suggested that a MRI be done, and it was that MRI that detected a fairly large brain tumor in my head, and that was just 6 months ago, six,
Wow.
8 months ago. So it just seems so ironic that here I am now having to assess my mortality and make sure I had all of my affairs in line. And I jokingly refer to this in social media and such because it just seems so ironic that I had to uh, face this myself.
Well, it's interesting that you began your career in end of life at 19 when I can imagine a lot of people are coming to you and saying, "What's this 19-year-old kid telling me about getting a will?" Or, "What does this young guy know about end of life?" And now you're also, like, being faced with that as well. That's that's pretty profound.
Well, it is, yeah, and I think I had a pretty good compelling message before I was diagnosed with this brain tumor, but this whole workup for the brain surgery and everything, and all my preparations to make sure that my wife would be okay if I died during
Mhm,
surgery, and there was certainly that risk, uh, but I wanted to make sure that she was prepared and things would be as easy as possible for her. So I had met with a buddy of mine and prearranged my cremation with him, and I had all of my life insurance claim forms all ready to go. So my wife would basically just have to add a proof of death. That she could easily get from my buddy, the funeral director, and basically carry on and settle all these things that would be all be a part of my estate if I died.
mhm. Yeah, so it's really an act of care.
It is. Yeah.
Mhm,
When I signed my book, I was in Indigo last night. My wife and I went to a local Indigo where I signed a bunch of books and we had taken some pictures and things. And I was mentioning to someone that when I sign each of my books, I write in it, do it for them. I think
mm,
that's just a short, meaningful message that really all of this all is an act of care, as you said, for those that we love.
mhm. Now, if someone's single and they have no children and maybe they're low income, um, it'd be easy for them to say, well, why would I bother planning for end of life? And do you have an answer to someone who might say that?
I do, and it's not just funeral planning, it's also advanced care planning, medical care planning.
Mm,
I'm currently speaking with one of the upper executives at the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association as well, because there's many organizations and even the medical field as well wants to inspire more people to complete their power of attorney. Because if someone is incapacitated and can't speak for themselves, and again, I reference this in my book, during COVID, there was a lot of people that couldn't breathe or even talk to a large degree to share what their wishes were. So it's so important that we have these types of documents completed to give other people that power if all of a sudden we can't do it or we've died or whatever the situation may be. And it's one of the easiest things to put off, but it just makes it so much easier for other people. And again, it's an act of caring.
hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny that you brought up the COVID-19 pandemic because that's one question that I'm asking just about everybody is how did the pandemic affect what you do?
Well, I was working on my book at the time, so it didn't really affect me to a great degree. I reference it a couple of times within the book, but from
Mhm.
what I've within the funeral industry, it changed the funeral industry to a degree, as I'm sure it did with many other industries, including the legal industry, et cetera, where that more people we're forced to do more online, and
Mhm.
that's just the way now the world seems to be with having more services and such online, and it does make it more convenient. It's not quite the same as getting together face to face with people, but it does have its advantages.
Mhm. Would you say that some of the things that happened during the pandemic for the end of life industry, would you say that they were better or worse?
Well, that's hard to say, Donnalee, because it certainly uh, was caught the attention of the world, didn't it? Especially when there was not enough ventilators for people to be put on when they were incredibly ill with COVID in those early stages of the pandemic, and the medical community was forced to determine who would live and who would die, and that is, as again I reference within my book, uh, that these medical professionals were never faced with that before, and it flew in the face of their ethics and what they were trained to do in attempting to save everyone. It was a very unusual time.
Hmm. This is probably a slightly heavier question, but what's one lesson that this industry has taught you that you think everyone should learn?
Not to procrastinate,
Oh,
to
but I love procrastination, Greg.
yeah, me too. Me too. And there's many things that we should all be doing, but when it comes to this sort of planning, it's kind of compounded because it's an uncomfortable topic. Nobody likes to talk about becoming incapacitated and being rushed into an emergency room unconscious or being killed in a car crash or whatever.
Hmm.
But if people knew more about what would happen if potentially happen if they don't have these things in place and how it can negatively affect those that they love and care about, I think more people would be motivated to take the steps to learn about what can be done. And that's why I wrote this short book, was just to get people thinking and engage the people who can help them. There are all kinds of good lawyers out there, good financial planners who do this on a regular basis. And I've
Hmm.
done this type of work as a financial planner and funeral director. I know it's not overly complicated to do, but it needs to get done.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we talked a little bit about there potentially being this idea around your work that is rather depressing. Aside from that, can you tell me a common myth about end of life care?
Yes, yes. The first one that comes to mind is a superstitious based theory that I'm sure still exists in the minds of many people, and it really comes down to the fact that there are some people who still believe that when they if they were to complete a will, that would tend to lead to their demise faster than if they didn't complete a will, which I
Oh,
think is
wow.
below. But that the whole aspect, Donnalee, of the statistics of only about half the adult population in Canada having a current and valid will also applies in the States and in Australia, in the United Kingdom, but it's worse in Asia, actually, and that is primarily due to superstition. And I reference an article in my book that talks about an article online, actually, and it provides the link at the back of the book that talks about this. Um, and the aspect that it is pretty well considered taboo in many parts of Asia that if one completes a will, it's going to lead to their death, and that's why this whole aspect of so many people of that massive population not having a current and valid will is based in that superstition.
Wow. I hadn't really thought about that, but I suppose there's also this idea behind a lot of the wellness movement about manifestation that if you think about something, it will come to you. So perhaps that plays into
Yes,
that superstition.
yes, the law of attraction, that sort of thing.
Ah, yes. Hmm.
Yes, and maybe it's true, I don't know, but I've met all kinds of people in the funeral business that would tend to disagree with that type of approach, and, when you think about it, if anybody was, leery or superstitious or wanting to stay completely away from death, they wouldn't get involved in that industry anyway, would they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what? Well, and then look at me, and I could die tomorrow. Any of us could die tomorrow or today, for that matter. But I've got a pretty decent 6-inch scar on the side of my head here, and underwent this surgery back in May of this year to get this tumor out of my head. And I've worked in the industry and been around death all my life, and such. And anyway, I guess what I'm
Mm.
getting at is that I think more people should really get over this type of superstition about the fear of doing this, because there are so many benefits in having it done. And actually, another factor that I hadn't mentioned is, but I have mentioned it in my book, is that the stress of aging can actually be reduced by having this planning done.
Ah, that's an
Isn't that
interesting point.
isn't that something? It's
Yeah.
not it's not the fountain of youth, but it's a pretty compelling reason to get one's affairs in order.
Hmm. Yeah. I suppose that because people weren't thinking about it, that they weren't stressing about it either.
Yes.
But it sounds like
Yeah.
that's not the case. Now, did your work prepare you in any way when you had this terrible diagnosis and you were undergoing this surgery? Maybe you've already answered this question, but I was wondering if perhaps you felt more confident facing death after having been exposed to so much.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I
Mm.
was. Yeah, to answer your question, I was more confident going into that operating room. I was confident sitting at this desk, making sure the beneficiary forms and all of the other aspects of what I'd be leaving for my wife, the computer passwords and all of that information here, where she would find it all if God forbid I died.
Oh my
It,
gosh, the
it was,
passwords. I didn't even think about the passwords.
and that's important. That's
Yeah.
critically. So yeah, it did give me a higher comfort level with all of this, Donnalee. But I felt like I had to also come clean and be transparent in my message. And 2 days before the surgery, my stepdaughter says to me, "Greg, we should take that video that you recorded on your phone out in the truck in the driveway after you told mom about your diagnosis." And both my wife and I thought it was a terminal diagnosis initially, until we saw the
Wow.
specialist a few days later. Um, and I recorded it, fortunately. So my stepdaughter puts it on TikTok, and that one video has been viewed over 1.7 million times.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
if you look on TikTok and look up author mortality, you'll see that I've also posted some other videos as well, because it just made sense to keep the conversation going when I had that type of response. But there's an interest in this sort of thing, but it just seemed to me that I would be foolish not to be transparent with everyone and tell them across all of the social media platforms that yes, I've been diagnosed with a brain tumor, and here I've got to deal with this myself. 2 months after publishing this book on sharing what I thought was a critically important message.
Well, I'm thinking right now that maybe that law of attract well,
Maybe. But you know what, Donnalee? Here's a better way that I've been phrasing this and positioning this with other people. I really do think that there's a higher power working in my life.
mhm. Yeah,
I do.
there very well could be. I think
Yeah.
yeah, you know what? I think there is a higher power that works within us, and I'm not a very religious woman. That's
Yeah, fair enough. Well, and I think wrestle with those sorts of thoughts from time to time, but it just seems to me that everything that I've done in my life up until this point, I had thought was getting me ready to publish this book, and then bang, out of the blue, I went in to talk to him about a sore neck, which I thought was stress and sitting here at a computer all the time. And he said, "Greg, don't worry about that. You've got a bigger issue. You've got a pretty big brain tumor that's got to be taken out." And, I was in shock. I didn't know what to think.
mm, yeah, absolutely you were. Yeah.
And
Wow.
he didn't tell me initially if it was cancerous or not. I had to wait 3 days. He said, "Go on home, uh, I'm following up with an ear, nose, and throat specialist who will need to see you relatively soon." And that's really all he told me, because, again, a general physician is, they want to refer to the specialist to get into the weeds about what the situation is.
Mm,
So again, I assumed it was cancerous, and both my wife and I, over that entire weekend, were convinced that was going to die. And I didn't want to tell her right away. That was on a Thursday morning, and I didn't want to tell her because I didn't want to ruin her day Thursday, and then I didn't want to keep her all up all night Thursday night. And then I didn't want to ruin her day Friday. So I ended up waiting until Saturday morning to tell her. And, boy, what a emotional weekend that was.
yeah.
E
You don't
especially on the radio, we listened to a type of soft rock radio station, and so many of the songs by Burton Cummings and all these other artists were talking about love and, breaking up and, when you go away and all those sorts of things, and, oh my god, it was just every other song seemed to be relating to my pending death.
yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be a constant reminder.
A lot of tears shared that weekend.
I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was.
But we also danced a lot and became closer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can imagine so.
yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
But we take all these things for granted, and that's another
Mm,
part of my message. People don't wanna think about these things, and they put it off, but death really is, it's around us all the time. We
mhm,
see it in the news, we turn on the radio or open up Google or whatever, any browser, and we see that death and bad news is around us all the time, but there are so many people that just kind of are they tune out, and
mhm.
it's unfortunate. More people need to tune into this and be prepared, because our last day could be at any given moment, and I've seen it so many times.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's interesting that, you're in the business of death, but it reminds you to live.
it does. Yeah,
Mm.
it does. Yeah.
So, in contrast to a lot of the really serious and, provoking things, have you had any funny experiences or funny stories from the end of life business?
Yes, the first one that comes to mind was when I was a young funeral director. Um, working one evening in the funeral home with the senior director, and I was working at what we called the donation desk on the main floor of the funeral home. And there was a family that were in for a visitation for an elderly woman that had died. And I didn't really know the family all that well. The senior director was the one that had a closer connection with them. And I was quite green in the funeral business, being young. And this older fella walked up from the lounge area, and I said, "Can I help you, sir?" And he said, "I've lost my wife." And I said, "Well, if she's not downstairs having a coffee, maybe she's down the hall speaking with one of the other family members." And he said, "No, she died." And boy, did I feel like a heel. And it's true. That's exactly what happened. But it instilled in me the need for me to know the family members, the key players in the family, because I certainly didn't want that to happen again. I felt completely embarrassed and like I felt like I didn't want that to happen again for sure. But anyway, if I don't recall exactly what happened after that, that was long ago. But it's one of the more funny things that I can recall.
The first time I ever visited a cemetery, I was looking for the grave of a friend of mine, and the gentleman who looked after the grounds, he's like, "Can I help you?" I said, "Well, I'm looking for a friend, but he's not like." Just, I can it's like stumbling. I'm like, "Well," I'm like, "I'm looking for my friend, but he's underground." Like,
Right, right.
yeah, these different phrases that we use every day that can be
Yeah, yeah,
so different.
it's such a delicate topic, and uh, I'm hoping that over time people will become a little more comfortable with all of this because we all have to face it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if you, Donnalee, have met people who have never really had anyone close to them die, or they had never been to a funeral. They've never seen a dead person. It's just that I don't know. It just seems our society is it's very much a death denying society, and that's what I had learned when I went to Humber College years ago to become a funeral director, and still much the case today.
Well, I think our society in North America, and perhaps this is across the world, but we really put so much value on youth, and perhaps
Yes.
that's part of it.
Very true. Very,
Hmm.
very true. And yeah, I think that is the case. Even and I see the pictures in Shoppers Drug Mart when I go into Shoppers Drug Mart and see the pictures of the in their beauty boutique of the younger ladies and the older ladies,
Hmm.
and how great they look in these pictures. But you're right. Our
Hmm.
society doesn't want to age and become frail, and it does. But we're all
Yeah.
getting older every day. We need to come to terms with these things and plan ahead.
Hmm. So, if your parents were asked what their son does, what would they say you do?
Well, I think they would say that their son helps people. Um, Yeah. I don't know, Donnelly. I don't know how they would phrase that. Uh,
That's okay.
it's
Yeah.
that's a tough question, but they used to basically just say that I was a funeral director, or when I was working in the financial industry, I worked as a financial planner. I
Hmm.
don't know what my father would say now. My mom died uh, about 3 years ago. She was quite active, and then actually flatlined in front of me, and was taken off life support the next day. So
Wow.
yeah, that's another aspect that was kind of bizarre in my life as well. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, so I don't know how to answer your question, what my surviving father would say that I do, but he's quite interested and keen to see this prove successful.
Quite often, when we have unusual jobs, our parents don't quite know how to describe them because they're not as
Yes.
usual.
Yeah, well, especially if they're not typical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, if you could try another occupation other than your own, What do you think you'd want to do?
I'd like to fly for a living.
Ah, the helicopter pilot.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to fly something for a living. Yes.
Cool. So, to wrap things up here, where can listeners find you online? And can you tell us a little about your book one last time?
Yes, yes. My book can be found on my website, which is do not ignore your mortality.com. And on that same website, it talks about my backstory, why I've done this, and much of this similar information that I've shared here with you today, but it goes into a little more uh, details in some sense, but it also provides people with an opportunity to buy the book. The physical book, the ebook, and the audiobook are available on all of the major retail platforms, including Amazon and Barnes and Noble, etc. And that's the easiest way to find the info is on that website, do not ignore your mortality.com. And you can also reach me through that site as well if anybody wants to reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and experience with us today, Greg. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Donnalee. All the best.
Thanks.
I remember a friend of mine saying, Greg, why did you put on Facebook that you've got this brain tumor? And I didn't get into it with him, but I thought, well, duh, is there, any other way to be?